For those of you old enough to remember, Fire Emblem Genealogy the Holy War, previously translated as Fire Emblem Descent of Jihad, was actually the first game in the series to have child units. Unlike the other games, the game's 12th chapter runtime is split 50-50 across the adults and kids. The community colloquially refers to these as Gen 1 and 2. The main cast of Gen 2 is composed of the children of Sigurd's army. If you try going on Serene's Forest or the Fire Emblem Wiki, you'll probably notice that none of these characters have any concrete information about their stats. That's because the equipment and stats of the characters are completely determined by who their parents were in Gen 1.
Oh boy, I do love eugenics and my strategy dating sims.
The most astute gamers, of course, will want to optimize the system to create the most monstrous little war criminals. For those of you who want to do that, this video will be an in-depth look at the pairing system, along with a guide for the most optimal pairings. Oh yeah, spoilers ahead for most of the game, but most of you watching this video are probably younger than the game itself and already knows what happens.
Anyways, Sigurd fucking dies.
Sin City wasn't made for you.
So before you go trying to fill out a spreadsheet of every possible child build, it would probably be worth knowing what exactly counts as a pairing. By going onto the status screen for a character and scrolling down, it will show who a character's lover is. If anything is there already, that means those two units have been paired up and there's nothing you can do about it. If you go into the castle and speak with the love guru, you can find out who your unit has the hots for. The character listed here is the character that currently has the highest bond with that unit. Essentially, the love system is an invisible XP gauge every unit has, which gains points when interacting with characters of the opposite sex. Once a bond between characters reaches 500 points, only then does the game make it an official pairing. The bond between each character grows independently of one another. Unlike in real life, love is 100% reciprocated in this game. So if Lex has 300 points in his bond with Ira, Ira will have 300 points in her bond with Lex. Okay, now put a big asterisk next to everything I've just said. So because the plot demands it and Thracia 776 is a game that exists, Deirdre and Sigurd, along with Quan and Ethelyn, will always pair up with one another. You can essentially treat these four as out of the equation when units are rizzing each other up. You may be asking yourself, Squidee, how do I rizz up this hot Myrmidon with Pursuit and Astra? Well, there's several ways for characters to accumulate points with one another.
Number 1, Bein Friend.
Whenever you recruit another female unit into your army, she will start off with a base amount of points with every male unit. By default, every bond in the game starts off with 50 points accumulated. There are a few exceptions that I'll list off now. Ira has 0 points in all of her bonds except with Lewin and Beowulf, who start off with 50 points. Claude also starts off his bond with Ira with 200 points. Aranis kicks it off with Lewin with a whopping 210 points. Claude starts off at 100 points with Aranis as well. Because of how late you get tailed to you in Gen 1, the devs decided to throw you a bone and make every bond start with 120 points. Finn and Claude get an extra 60 points with their initial bond to tail to you. Being arguably the most insufferable character in the game, it's only fitting that Sylvia starts off with 0 points in every bond.
However,
Sylvia starts off with 190 points with Claude and 200 points with Lewin. This will come back to bite many players in the ass later. Bridget has an initial 100 point start with Midir. Azel and Jamka start with 150 points, and Finn starts off with 180 points. Edain is probably the most unique of the bunch since she has a very diverse starting bond list. From lowest to highest, Nisha, Alec, Arden, Finn, Chulain, Lex, and Du all start off with 0 points. Lewin starts off with 50 points, Beowulf starts off with 100 points, Midir and Azel both start off with 120 points, Claude starts off with 150, and Jamka starts off with 250 points.
Number 2, Passive Accumulation.
So at the end of each turn, all units will passively level their bond with one another regardless of the state they're in. They'll accumulate around 1 to 4 points per turn. The exact number varies from character to character, but the average is usually 2. For some reason, if your name is Bridget or Tiltingus, you'll gain
10 goddamn points
for every turn with Finn. I don't know, man, maybe he's just built different.
Number 3, Adjacent Placement.
This is the main way you'll be building points between characters. With the exception of inside castles, whenever two units of the opposite sex are placed adjacent to one another, the bond between these two characters will increase by 5 points. This still counts if the units move to a different location, as long as they're adjacent when you click the end turn button. Both passive and adjacent placement stop working once you hit turn 50, but will start up again upon completing the chapter. So this isn't actually a mechanic per se, but rather an affectionate nickname to a very strange glitch. I won't go into the technicals about what exactly is going on in the game's code because we would be here for hours. Essentially, when pairing units together on the map, you have to think about them less like two peas in a pod and more like a human centipede. If two or more female units are placed adjacent to a male unit, the game has a hard-coded hierarchy table to resolve who gets those 5 points at the end of the turn. However,
Due to a programming oversight,
this priority resolution still happens when adjacent female units are chained together. In this example, if you were to put Lachesis next to Jamka, but put Ira next to Lachesis, Ira has higher priority in the game's table, so she ends up with the 5 points. In the case that the two women were swapped, Ira would still take over because of her priority. This chaining can even be done to make Tetris blocks. Here's the tables of each character's priority. If you want to avoid this from happening altogether, just make sure to place your units diagonally from the ones you don't want to pair together. Now on to the final method.
Number 4. Support conversations.
Almost any support conversation between two compatible characters of the opposite sex will generate a minimum of 50 points between the two characters. Some conversations like the one with Alexer Chulain and Ira in Chapter 3, or Alec and Sylvia in Chapter 2 will generate 100 points between the characters. In Chapter 4, there's a support conversation between Aranis and Loon that would absolutely wreck any pairing you already had by adding 290 love points between the two. And no, this is not made up. It's almost as if these two had a canonical pairing or something. So the game really likes to withhold information from the player unless you decided to try and Google Translate the game's manual. Going back to the Love Guru in the Augury is the only real way to make a general assessment of progress without crunching the numbers yourself. He gives a general hint as to who has the most points with a given unit and a range of where that progress is in that pair. In addition to the pairing system, Descent of Jihad has a complementary inheritance system that will determine the builds of the Gen 2 units. For the people not into the dating sim aspects of this game, this is basically the character creator aspect for the kids. The growth rates, stats, inventory, skills, and bank account of your Gen 1 characters will all influence their children. For growth rates, a child's growth rate is determined by this formula, which takes the sum of growth rate of the same sex parent and then half the growth rate of the opposite sex parent, then any flat growth rate bonus from Holy Blood. Major Holy Blood grants double the percentage bonus. When performing these calculations, it's important to note that the growth rates of Gen 1 characters include their bonuses from Holy Blood, which is not accounted for in Gen 2 calculations. In general, the father will almost always have higher growth rates so that they will have the most impact on the child. You can play around with crunching the numbers using the Tanis Manor companion site, link in description. For base stats, excluding HP and luck, they all follow a very long and complicated formula, which will favor the stats of the same-sex parent. The stats used in this calculation follow the parent's current stats at the end of Chapter 5, excluding any bonuses from rings or holy weapons. It's worth noting that depending on the version of the game you play on, this calculation can change. The Project Naga translation patch will change how the stats are calculated by replacing this modulo 15 with just a standard cap of 15. Inventory follows a very simple system where the child of the same sex will receive their parents' weapons as Christmas presents. In the case where a parent has an opposite sex child that shares their class, this will take priority so that the child gets the weapons from the parent of that class. This exception only applies to Bridget and Ethelyn, where their sons will take their mother's inventory instead. Any kill bonuses that a weapon accumulated in Gen 1 will pass down to Gen 2 as well. Any weapon given to Anna for safekeeping will automatically end up in the child's inventory by the start of Gen 2. Skills in FE4 are broken up into two categories, personal skills and class skills. Class skills will not be inherited for the sake of balancing reasons. Child units may still have these skills if they share a class with their parent. Any personal skill that a parent unit has will automatically be passed down to both children. Astra, Sol, and Luna follow a different set of rules. In order for any of them to be inherited, they require a child unit to be both a sword user and a foot unit. Each child will inherit 10% of their parents' combined gold, along with an extra 2,000 in allowance. Theoretically, children can get access to more money by having them inherit items with a high resale value. Then they can go pawn it off to Walter and Jesse or something.
Oh my god! Motherfucking
Major Holy Blood.
So this part of the inheritance system probably deserves its own timestamp from how influential it can be on a character and just how complicated it is. There's a lot of inner workings, but hopefully this will condense it into a single rule you have to follow. On the status screen, you can hit the A button on the bottom page to bring up this giant tapestry. This is the holy blood lineage of a character. Any spot filled with a green light is minor holy blood. Any spot filled with a flashing green light is major holy blood. At most, any character can have only 2 holy blood types at a time. Possessing any type of holy blood will provide growth rate bonuses ranging from 10 to 20%. Major holy blood will double said bonus. If a unit's class can wield a weapon corresponding to the major holy blood's legendary weapon, that unit's weapon level will be increased by 1 letter grade, jumping straight to a star rank if major holy blood. Okay, so here's how it's passed down to the kids. When a mommy minor holy blood bearer and a daddy minor holy blood bearer love each other very much,
Despite being distant relatives.
both their kids will get 2 minor blood genes. So basically, the major holy blood of a parent will always pass down to the child who inherits that parent's inventory, like mother like daughter, unless your name is Leaf or Fibale. If 2 parents share a common minor bloodline, then both their children will inherit major holy blood from that type. With the exception of Deirdre,
And some story spoilers.
no Gen 1 unit has more than 2 types of holy blood. This means, at most, a child unit can have major plus minor, major, or 2 minor holy blood combinations. Okay, I think that's all of it. Like, bro, this was barely even explained in the game's manual. But, when a character gets major holy blood, that means they get to use... Do you guys remember the 4 golden weapons of Spinjitzu from Ninjago? Imagine those, but they have 30 might and a hit rate of 90. The holy weapons are incredibly broken in both Gens 1 and 2 and can absolutely trivialize most encounters down to a single hit. In addition to requiring a star rank in that weapon category, a unit needs major holy blood to wield that weapon. Or I guess they just turn into dust. There are a total of 12 weapons, which I won't go into detail about how to obtain. Only half of them are actually obtainable by the player without hacking. Realistically, there's only like 2 weapons you need to worry about when it comes to a pairing choice. The first of the 2 is probably the least important unless you're doing an Iron Man run. The Valkyrie is a single-use staff to revive a fallen ally, and it costs as much as a down payment on a house to fix it. As long as Claude pairs up with either Sylvia or Aranis, that will ensure it goes to someone who has the blood and the weapon level to use it. In the case that it's imperative you get the Valkyrie, it's better off going with Aranis because Ced will be able to use it much earlier on in Gen 2. The second is the best tome you can get your hands on in this game, excluding Naga of course. Not only are wind tomes lighter than their other anima counterparts, but this thing gives fucking 20 speed and 10 skill just by having it equipped. This thing's busted, man. The only characters in Gen 2 that can use it are Ced, Arthur, and Corpora, with the most feasible users being Ced and Arthur. If you want to use this, you'll have to pair Lewin up with either Tailtiu for Arthur, Aranis for Ced, or Sylvia for Corpora. Even after a male and female unit are paired and inevitably have protected sex, it's still the player's responsibility to make sure the mother stays alive until the end of Gen 1. In the case that a female unit either dies or doesn't get paired up, any children that the mother would have had will be filled in by replacement units. These totally real and legally distinct characters will not have any holy blood benefits and are generally downgrades compared to their authentic counterparts. For example, Larse and Skahak will be replaced by Kredne and Dalvin? Dude, what the hell are these names? Neither of them get Nihil or Astra. There is one replacement unit who could be considered better than their genuine counterpart. Lelia is the replacement for Lean that is also a dancer. For one, Lelia gets Charm, which is not possible for Lean to inherit. Lean does get Miracle and Adept, but Adept has next to 0 utility on a unit that isn't meant to be dealing damage in the first place. Lelia can make up for this by getting a Miracle Band or Miracle Sword to improve her survivability. In general, it should be your goal to avoid getting these replacement units, especially if you want to take advantage of holy weapons. There can be an argument made for Lelia, but a dancer is still going to be good at the end of the day. Fire Emblem 4 is definitely a work of its time that has held up incredibly well, yet one of its most prominent mechanics in the game was a close-guarded developer secret. In retrospect, it makes sense that they wanted to make this mechanic seem more organic for the time by not explaining much. If FE4 eventually does get a remake, I hope they do explain more of this to the player. Of course, they won't and shouldn't go into the level of detail I did in this video. The player should only know enough to make informed decisions about how they play. Too much information is both overwhelming and sours their adventure by turning it into math homework. So yeah, that's how you breed and make kids in Fire Emblem: Descent of Jihad. Anyways, can I have my heroes account